this riot helped to kind of amplify their message on a national stage, so it worked to their advantage.
I'm a filmmaker who's passionate about LGBTQ+ issues, but like so many of us, I never grew up learning about our collective queer history. So with the help of a few friends,
we're traveling the world to different Pride celebrations
to learn more about where we came from
and where we are going.
Edinburgh, Scotland. Carved from 350-million-year-old volcanic stone, the stunning Scottish capital is shaped by millennia of reinvention and intellectual fire. From its roots in prehistory, when Bronze and Iron Age people first occupied this extinct volcano almost 10,000 years ago, to countless invasions, wars, fires, and political control, Edinburgh has continually had to rebuild itself. But all that history still mingles in the cobbled streets of Old Town, to the Georgian boulevards of the New Town, to the Broughton Street LGBTQ+ bars. Edinburgh is a place where the ancient and the modern sit side by side. With a population of around 500,000 people, Edinburgh is home to the Scottish Government, courts, palaces, countless churches, and has long been the centre for education with its network of schools and universities. In fact, during the 18th century Scottish Enlightenment, it is here where philosophers, scientists, doctors, and political thinkers gathered to imagine new futures, and Edinburgh earned its nickname, the Athens of the North. The city is also a major European financial center and global cultural center, with endless museums, galleries, restaurants, bars, and pubs, and is famously home to the Fringe, the world's largest annual international arts festival. Edinburgh's long tradition of creativity and renewal has also shaped its complex queer history. Homosexuality wasn't decriminalized in Scotland until 1980, and for decades before that, LGBTQ+ people relied on quiet networks of pubs, student flats, and community groups to find connection and safety. By the 1990s, public activism and pride marches helped transform that underground culture into a visible, thriving community. Of course, LGBTQ+ people didn't just suddenly appear in Scotland in the 1980s, as same-sex relationships have existed in Scotland for centuries, and perhaps none more controversial than King James VI of Scotland, who in 1603 succeeded his cousin Elizabeth I, who died childless. As King James I, his reign marked a turning point in British history, uniting the crowns of Scotland and England, but his personal life has also drawn lasting interest. To understand why, I'm headed to the beautiful Princes Street Gardens to meet with Hannah McKay Tate of Scotland with Hannah, a tour guide whose work brings visibility to the hidden and overlooked LGBTQ+ histories woven throughout Scotland's past.
So James VI of Scotland, or First of England, inherits the throne from his mother, Mary Queen of Scots. So she is forced to abdicate when he's a little over 1 year old. So he is the King of Scotland in 1567 from the age of about 13 months old. And then much later, when he's in his 30s, he also inherits the throne of England from Elizabeth I, who was a first cousin of his mother. And she is famously known as the Virgin Queen. That part's debatable, but she is unmarried and has no offspring that we know of. So as she doesn't have a direct heir, he's the obvious successor. And he's the first king or queen to be the king of both Scotland and England at the same time. James was particularly well known in his lifetime for relationships with men who are described as his male favourites, which is a common position at court. It's kind of like your best pal at the court. Lots of kings had male favourites. But James seems to have particularly good evidence that these relationships went a little further than your average bromance at court, because he is called to justify these relationships by many of his advisors at the time. So there's gossip happening about the relationships James has with men. And there are several of these male favourites from his teenage years right through to his death, really. In particular, in 1617, he gets called to justify his relationship with a man called George Villiers, who he also makes the first Duke of Buckingham. And his advisors call him in because people are concerned about gossip about him and George. And James's justification is essentially to say, yes, I love George very much. I like him better than I like any of you. And Jesus used to hang out with men all the time. What are you saying about Jesus? I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but that's essentially the argument that he's making to his advisors, that if it was okay for Jesus to hang out with all these guys, why are you hassling me about how much time I spend with George? There's often an effort to kind of write the queerness out of these relationships by describing them as romantic friendships. And there is certainly a different kind of mode of masculinity in the 17th century where men are more effusive and more emotionally open with their male friends than we might expect them to be in a normative way nowadays. But the fact that James is being questioned about it implies his relationships go beyond what's considered normal at the time. So we even have letters that survive between James and George that speak to the closeness of their friendship, if you will, where James refers to himself as George's husband, refers to George as his wife. And there's even one where James says that he should rather live banished in any part of the world with you than live a sorrowful widow's life without you. And there are similar letters from George to James where he describes loving all of James, and he says, I truly adore all your parts, which are more than ever any other man had, which again sounds quite sexy in tone, I think, for a letter to the king. And George, I think this is my favorite one, reminisces in a letter about a time when they seem to have been in bed together, and he is writing later after they're no longer seeing each other and says, I wonder if you love me still the way you did that night at Farnham when the bed's head could not be found between the master and his dog. So we have this very kind of intense, seemingly very physical relationship between James and George in addition to their romantic letters to one another. Nowadays, a lot of people speculate that we might place him, somewhere as bisexual or queer rather than necessarily gay. We can't really ascribe a particular label to anybody in the past, but he does marry, in the 1590s, he marries a woman called Anna of Denmark, and they do produce an heir together. So he's clearly performing his marital duty, if you will, but this is, as we're saying, a compulsory thing for a king to do. So it's difficult to read too much into whether he's interested in women or not because of his marriage to one. And they do appear to have been very unhappy in their marriage together, but that's not at all unusual in royal marriages. I mean, even into like the 90s, look at Charles and Diana. These were so often thrown together for political reasons, essentially, for alliances, for shoring up the institution. So the fact he's unhappy with his wife doesn't necessarily mean he wasn't interested in women overall. Oddly contradictory figure, because it can be very tempting to see him as a kind of queer icon of the past. I think it can be very tempting with a lot of people to kind of turn them into a hero as you look back historically. But he's also intensely religious. He commissions the King James Bible, and he's really into witch hunting. Is a big part of what James's reign is remembered for overall. So he's certainly not the kind of, potentially queer man who'd want to go out for cocktails with the girls. He's a lot more like, let's sweep the girls up and try them as witches because I think they're trying to bring down my reign. So there's a real kind of darkness to James as well, and I think it's easy to lose that in the kind of fabulous side of court and him enjoying all of these different relationships with men.
Medicine has shaped Edinburgh for centuries, with professional medical organisations emerging more than 500 years ago, long before King James was even born. The city's medical school has long been a centre of innovation and challenging norms, but its halls didn't always welcome everyone. I'm joined by Cooper King, a volunteer archivist, queer historian and PhD candidate, here at the beautiful Holyrood Park. We're in this special place to talk about Dr. James Barry, the 19th century surgeon with deep ties to Edinburgh, whose life continues to spark conversations about gender, identity, and how queer histories are remembered.
Dr. James Barry was a doctor for the British Army that was born in Cork in 1789. and moved to Edinburgh in his late teens and early 20s to complete his medical degree. And at that time, he transitioned to using the name James Barry in everyday life. He then sat his exams and managed to get into the army, which was a pretty big deal because he had said that he wanted to be a soldier. That would not have been possible for him unless he was an officer or a medical officer, because there was a physical to get into the army. So a lot of historians believe that one of the reasons he did take up the name James Barry and he did go to medical school was that was his way into the army. That was his way into independence, into sort of the social status that it would allow him.
What were Dr. Barry's greatest achievements?
He changed the way that the British military approached medical procedures. He actually spoke out against what was a common practice at the time. In one of the colonies that he was stationed in, leprosy was really large. They were making the people still work through being ill because they were slaves. But he changed that policy. He added in extra sanitation and hygiene before we knew much about germ theory. And he was credited with performing the first successful cesarean section, but that actually goes to quite a few medical professionals in Uganda first. But he changed the way that the British approached it, and he made it a regular practice that the mother could survive.
What do we know about Dr. Barry's personal life?
I think one of the most well-known personal stories of Dr. Barry is his relationship with Lord Somerset, who was a figure in his life that some consider a father figure, but there's also potentially some evidence that he was a lover of James Barry. There was a report, and it was actually plastered across, that someone had found the two of them having sex with one another. Charles then went on trial for sodomy. He was acquitted of it, but the relationship between Barry and Somerset was very close for the rest of their lives. There were cartoonists that would depict the two's relationship almost like a married couple. And I just think that's an important thing to think about, that some of the evidence of their relationship is some of the evidence that people have used to claim that Barry was actually a woman disguised as a man, because they can't imagine why a trans man or someone who felt like they were a man would have a relationship with another man.
What events unfolded after Dr. Barry's death, and what did it tell us about his identity?
After Barry's death, he was outed as having what some would consider female parts. There was a maid in the house that he was staying in that believed that she could basically sell this story or be paid off by the military to not sell the story, to reveal that Barry was all along a woman. That ended up overshadowing a lot of Barry's life, because even though he had asked to be buried in the clothes that he had asked to be wrapped in the sheets he was laying in and just buried as is. His wishes were disrespected and a full inspection of his body was done. All of the stories that you can find of Barry really revolve around this tale of a secret woman dressing as a man. Yeah, it's a really sad story. In some ways, I think the trans community specifically is quite happy to have the story of James Barry, but it makes a lot of us very sick to our stomachs to know what has happened to him, because that's still happening today. It's really just such a shame that what he's actually remembered for is the outing of his gender afterwards, and not the work that he fought really hard for in his life. He spent 45 years as a doctor, and that's not what people remember. His changes go unnoticed.
Shortly after Barry's death, a group of 7 women led by Sophia Jex-Blake, a lesbian physician, whose fight for access reshaped women's place in higher education. I'm making my way to the Lavender Menace Queer Books Archive, which was established to promote and benefit the LGBTQIA community and its allies. Named after the radical lesbian feminist collective of the 70s, the space hosts author events, workshops, community groups, and book clubs. It houses a wealth of stories about queer lives and historic figures. I'm meeting with Jacqueline, a volunteer at the archive, to talk about the long struggle for women to gain the right to study medicine in Scotland.
Dr. Sophia Jex-Blake, she was a physician, teacher and activist. She was one of the first women to study medicine in the UK. She founded institutions and schools such as the Edinburgh School of Medicine for Women, and she basically fought for women's right to study and practice medicine.
Who were the Edinburgh Seven, and what was their impact on the movement for women in medicine?
The Edinburgh Seven was a group of women co-founded and led by Sophia Jex-Blake. They were the first women in the UK to study medicine, and even though at the end of their studies they were denied their degrees, they still paved the way for women to eventually qualify and practice as doctors. They laid the groundworks. Her and the other members of the Edinburgh Seven, they had to face professors not teaching them or refusing to teach them, restricted access to the infirmary ward, higher fees, and just general distaste from their male peers, and that harassment and bullying accumulated in the Surgeons' Hall riot of 1870. The women were going to sit their exams in the Surgeons' Hall when a large crowd outside tried to prevent them from going to sit their exam. But the women sat their exams and they decided to face the crowd on their way out. It almost got a bit violent. They were throwing mud at them and just trying to kind of physically stop them from going in.
And how did this riot change public opinion?
So it sparked outrage, really, amongst all the papers. It got out that this was happening, and Sophia Jex-Blake, having wrote articles for the Scotsman at the time, decided to really take advantage of this moment. This riot helped to kind of amplify their message on a national stage rather than just being contained in Edinburgh itself.
What do we know about Sophia Jex-Blake's long-term relationship with Dr. Margaret Todd? And what does it say about the experiences of queer women back in the 19th century? Sophia
Jex-Blake and Margaret Todd, they lived and worked together very closely. And during a time when same-sex relationships weren't open, it's still quite clear that they had a very close, deep and lasting partnership. In Sophia Jex-Blake's will, for example, her personal diaries and letters were to be given to Margaret Todd in its entirety, and if Margaret Todd passed before Sophia Jex-Blake, they were to be burned without examination. So it's kind of what are these intimate details that we're missing out on? And when Jex-Blake passed, Margaret Todd wrote a biography detailing her entire life. So during the 19th century, it was very difficult for same-sex relations to be open. So they found a way for them to love each other, even in a society that didn't have space for that kind of relationship at the time. They had a very deep connection. How did Jex-Blake's activism and career influence future generations of women in medicine? Sophia Jex-Blake and the Edinburgh Seven's work and continuing campaigning for women's right to study medicine did lead to legislative change for women to qualify as doctors. After they'd finished studying, it was when they were working and teaching, so it was a wee bit after, but it did eventually lead to legislative change, and this wouldn't have happened without Sophia Jex-Blake and Edinburgh Seven.
Today, LGBTQ+ people in Scotland enjoy legal protections, marriage equality, and transgender legal recognition. In 2021, Scotland became the first country in the world to embed LGBTQ+ inclusive education and history across its national curriculum, and the country's commitment to LGBTQ+ rights and culture continues. I'm traveling to Glasgow, Scotland's most populated city, known for its grit, creativity, and unapologetic character. Long shaped by industry and working class culture, Glasgow has grown into one of the country's most vibrant centers for arts, fashion, music, activism, and queer life. Like elsewhere, drag queens here have achieved mainstream recognition, but drag kings still remain an underrepresented group. I'm on my way to meet the multi-award-winning Dorian T. Fisk, who is working to expand and diversify the drag king scene. As founder of Shut Up and King, Dorian mentors other drag kings and supports their creative journeys, building a community that's redefining Scottish drag. With the support of Creative Scotland's funding, he's been able to run programs that nurture drag king talent, helping to put drag king art firmly on the Scottish cultural map.
My stage name is Dorian T. Fisk. I go by Dorian out of drag as well. I was originally a drag king in Shanghai, China, where I spent most of my life, but just before COVID hit the world, I came back to the UK and landed in Scotland. We started to have conversations between myself and some of the other drag kings in the Scottish scene at the time, and noticed that folks were doing things on Zoom, and we thought, what about taking some of the workshops that I'd done in person previously to a format of online? We wanted to just keep active, have our art form, be something we could continue to practice and learn from with each other. That was one motivation. The other motivation was also to connect, grow and diversify the Scottish drag king scene.
The Kinkubator program offered workshops and mentorship for emerging drag kings, guided by established performers. After its second iteration, Shut Up and King launched a fully online and on-demand version of the course. What were some of the major productions that came out from Shut Up and King?
We've done our Scotland's New Kings on the Block 4 times now. 2 of those were the showcase at the end of the Kinkubator programs that ran. The very first one was a very memorable one for us because it was the first time that we had BSL, so sign language interpretation, and we were able to take it to a really large 200-seat venue. So for drag shows, that scale of venue is very rarely seen. So we were excited about being able to take it to a large venue. And it was notable because it was the first time we'd taken 10 drag kings through the Kinkubator program of mentorship, and they were showing their acts that they developed for the first time. It was also really great because we were able to bring up a drag king who is known as the godfather of the UK drag king scene, Adam All, to come and do the hosting for the event. And I think most proudly we were able to sell out the venue. So I feel like this was something that for us went down in history, also because we broke our record for the number of drag kings on stage at once.
And I understand you also had a performance at the Scottish Parliament?
We were invited by Creative Scotland as part of a presentation at Scottish Parliament to show the value in continuing to support and fund the arts here in Scotland. So that was really a wonderful honour. So we had participants from both Kinkubator programmes come, and we put together a drag king group number that told the Shut Up and King story. And we had a lot of fun on that stage, I can tell you. We think we were the first drag kings in the country to perform at Parliament, so that certainly put drag king artistry on the cultural map here.
What impact do you think Shut Up and King has had on the drag king scene here in Scotland and in the UK?
The drag kings that were performing at the time, there were only 8 or 10 of us, and now I can't even remember. The last time I tried to count, there were at least 40, 50 drag kings in the scene at the moment. So we've quadrupled the drag king scene. The kings that have come through our programs are also now starting their own shows. So we've got shows that are continuing to platform and showcase drag kings happening in Glasgow, Edinburgh, and some of the participants now are starting to think about doing their own shows in places further afield. Drag kings have taken our classes and gone and done some great things in their home countries. We've had Canadian drag kings do great stuff. We've had German drag kings winning awards, and they're also doing some wonderful things in America as well.
Today, Scotland is recognised as one of the world's most LGBTQ+ friendly countries in the world. And just like Edinburgh's long history of rebuilding and reimagining itself, this progress didn't happen overnight. From kings to medical pioneers, we are reminded that same-sex relationships and gender non-conforming people have existed in Scotland from the beginning. They may have faced enormous pressure because of who they were and what they wanted to achieve, but they still found a way to live, love, and push forward. Their determination helped to open doors that once seemed permanently shut. Together, these stories show how the past and present connect. The same creativity and resilience that shaped Edinburgh's history also shaped Scotland's queer history today. And thanks to the people preserving that past and the people reinventing what's possible right now, Scotland continues to move forward in a more open, welcoming, and inclusive future.